Hi, welcome. This is Laura from Healing with Spirit, with your next episode of Triggers and Spiritual Medicine. We're going to be talking some pretty heavy things, so you might want to make sure you're sitting down, not driving, all these things. But our whole goal today really is giving folks action steps. And if you're new to this podcast is really about addressing the triggers, the things that make us sick, that really facing the hard things, knowing how to dig deep to the roots, whether it's through racism, cancer, all these things, systemic oppression, domestic abuse, all environmental things, all these things that make us sick. And then what's the spiritual medicine at the end of the day? So I am so excited to have my friend Ukumbwa Sauti back again. I think this is the third or fourth time he has been on this podcast. We have been talking about these types of issues for quite some time, addressing issues around racism and patriarchy and men's work and accountability. Because again, this podcast is about what happens when harm is real. And then what do we do about it? We cannot heal if we don't face the hard truths and the root issues. We just put band-aids after band-aids after band-aids. And in a way, this is why we are where we are globally, because we have put band-aids on things. And now finally, those band-aids aren't working anymore. And now we've got a pandemic of cancerous issues that are really infecting our society.
Mhm.
So, my work, for those who aren't familiar, is I'm a multi-generational healer and intuitive. I have been addressing trauma and domestic violence for over 20 years as part of my work, not as my primary work. But I'm also an author, podcast host, obviously. And so we're going to be bringing in my expertise and training and work with Ukumbwa's work around, again, racism, patriarchy, men's work, accountability. And the fact that we're still having this conversation, Ukumbwa, is like, and that things are actually escalating. Remember, like the numbers used to be 1 in 4 women were,
Yeah,
impacted by domestic violence or abuse. And now it's
exactly.
1 in 3.
Yeah.
Like, and those numbers have escalated dramatically just in the last 10 years.
Right.
And I question how much of this is because of influencers like the Andrew Tates and, our lovely person sitting at the top seat of the office type of thing,
Yeah.
and all those people who we elect into positions of power, ignoring accounts of rape, sexual assault, child sexual abuse, all these things that we go, yeah, but. What I keep hearing is like the yeah,
Yeah.
but.
Hmm.
So for those who are listening, we're not going to rehash like what's wrong, because I think there are so many people that are addressing what's wrong.
Hmm.
What I think we're going to be trying to highlight is not only what's wrong, but how rape culture has been normalized, how harm has been minimized, how accountability is basically non existent. And then what actions both men, women, parents can do now. And then what process that I use with my clients to discern which actions are appropriate for you today. And welcome, Ukumbwa. I know in your work, for instance, please like introduce yourself, but I'm just curious because like this is like, I just want to get this out. Like, how do you distinguish between people being triggered and what is actually a response to what is ongoing systemic harm? Let's just start there.
Yeah. Well, and thank you again for having me with you and giving me an opportunity to talk about things that are important to me, I know are important to you. And precisely because we care about people. And we want to see healing and liberation happening in a very challenging world. So yeah, just want to say thank you for that. And yeah, we you had just mentioned about triggering and real harm and things like that, and what it immediately raises to me is in the context of what we're talking about, in context of rape culture and men's violence against women in the queer community. We have a lot of men responding. They're not using the term triggering, but they're actually responding in fragile ways to information, to the voices of women and queer folk, about the experiences they're having with men. And I think one of the things that gets distorted within the power of patriarchy, the power of systematized misogyny and misogynoir. Thank you, Dr. Moya Bailey, for that term and the writing on that subject around African women. And African and Black women, but that men feel set upon because women are telling the truth. So we respond in fragile and reactionary ways. And I'm glad we're not saying that we're triggered by this. And what we are is we're very reactionary, to this. But there is a difference between that, how men feel, and I really hate it that we are having this conversation about we're caught up in our shame and blame. When women on the other side of this power differential are bleeding out, are absolutely bleeding out, and have been doing so for a long time, and we're getting caught up in how we feel about what somebody said, which to me is a tremendous difference than being targeted by a global system of patriarchy that is just brutal and 24/7. I was talking to a woman friend yesterday, and the term 24/7 came out, that these attacks on women again and queer folk and are 24/7. It's kind of what a lot of people wake up to. It's what we go to sleep with. And literally go to sleep with the harm because it's in our homes. We bring that
Yeah,
harm.
right. I mean, people forget that
Mhm.
the most dangerous place for a woman to be is in her own home.
Yeah.
95% of domestic violence related homicide and familicide is committed by a man. As we have
Absolutely.
seen in recent stories and highlights of the travesties, it is 95% men. But when a woman does it, it's like this, that hits the headlines like all over the place. And it's so funny, like it's like we want to trash
Yeah.
the mother because she's behaving in a certain way, but the man, oh, he's got mental illness, oh, he's got this, oh, he's got that. Well, he coaches
Exactly.
Timmy's baseball team, and he donates so much money to this cause, and
Yeah.
he was the pastor of that church. By the way, like, we talk about religion, like
Mm.
the two largest areas I know that traffic children legally or abuse children and get away with it more times than not are pastors and priests and the family court system. Like, let's just call the kettle black for what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we cannot, I'm a firm believer, we cannot fully heal from our wounds
Mm.
if we are not addressing root issues and root systems of harm, which is what is being elevated now, right? Like that whole Telegram thing that just came out, right, with the 62 million,
Yeah.
motherless, right? And when we really look at that, it's something I've been seeing other people write about, something I've been hearing, and really sitting with motherless. Well, it's true. I mean, like family courts are giving, for instance, custody to documented abusers, rapists, and pedophiles at a rate of up to 80%
Right.
in family courts. Like, and they are, any mother that challenges that is being met with severe harm, incarceration, being severed completely 100% from their children, being threatened to have their nursing babies removed from them. This is the culture. And then when we add that to our great mother, how we're raping our earth, our trees, our land without sustainability, we wonder what has gone wrong, right? Because we have forgotten the importance that all of us are alive here today because of the mother.
Right.
And if we are focused on being motherless, then we are perpetuating harm, right? So
Absolutely.
I want to ask you, speaking of this, and patriarchy, I know is really like, your lean in experience too, as a learned behavior, and the role of race and power, and the cultural reinforcement of this harm, right? So a lot of people think of rape culture as like extreme cases.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you, like, how does it actually show up in everyday behavior, language, and what gets normalized or what gets ignored?
Yeah. Well, part of it, as I have seen it and as I've learned about it, is is a profound dehumanization of women and girls, um, and to not only make the assumption that women and girls have less value, and of course with women of color, BIPOC women, that takes on a more heinous level, because we know that Black girls are adultified, much more. It's said that they're fast and they want these kinds of things. They led people on, which is also generalized for some girls of certain ages. But this dehumanization and this stripping of the humanity of women and girls, which allows us to objectify and harm, that was written into the is still written into the United States Constitution about African and Black people, that we're three-fifths human, that kind of thing. So this is a systemic kind of messaging that's happening. So that dehumanization, we talk about rape jokes, which are never jokes. They're never funny, they're never good, they're never right. But that we have this talk about that, and we allow it. We have this concept of locker room talk, how we talk about women, and how we talk about things like body count, like how many sexual partners does a woman have, and if it's too high, then they have lesser value or something like that. When for men, a high body count, content is very masculine and manly
You're
and
a
valued
stud.
very
You're a
highly by
stud.
men. Right. So there's a definite double standard going on there. And so, things like that, not listening to the voices of women and girls, children and adults, and diminishing those ideas, those voices, which happens all the time, which is happening now because of the motherless, the news and talk about motherless. So many men are saying, well, it can't be, it's not all men, it can't be that bad. I don't see anything like that. I don't hear a situation of women having this kind of harm, things like that. So diminishing and devaluing the voices that are very direct, that are having the experience that women are having of men, and men reactively, not with any principle of compassion or love or care,
Curiosity.
or any of that good stuff, that we hopefully want throughout the world, are just pushing back at these voices, and we do it all the time. So we really have to look at language. We really have to look at relationships. We have to start, we want to, so many men are saying, well, 62 million doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean that. Oh, it's actually the visits on that day, which is still horrendous.
And let's just go back. Like
Still
that means
horrendous.
80, I think it's like 85
Mhm.
million views in March. So let's just
Right,
stop the numbers. The numbers
right,
aren't getting better, they're getting worse. And
right.
it brings me to a thing of like, when I was trying to get the nonprofit going,
Mhm.
MASO, which is Massachusetts Survivors Outreach, which was for survivors of abuse and healing programs. And I think this was like, I'm trying to think of the year, it must have been like 2010 or something like that, right around there. But I remember one of my interns had come to me addressing a situation where they were sexually assaulted in college, but they were drugged.
Oh boy.
And so I had to, I'm not going to go too much
Mhm.
into that just because of
Yeah.
just the sensitivity of it, except for the fact that one statement stood out. The reason why they did not go to the police department was because how many people on the campus were saying, oh, well, it couldn't have meant anything. Well, at least I don't remember. So then it wasn't harm. And I think that's part of rape culture, and that you can just take somebody. People don't realize when you have sexual intercourse with somebody, there's an energy exchange that the cellular body doesn't forget. Just because the mind may not remember because you were drugged, the body does remember. And there's an energy component to it of force, control, property, all these things. And the body does remember.
Yeah.
And so I found it quite disturbing that the rolling conversation on the college campus was about how women were discouraged from reporting sexual assault
Right.
because they didn't remember, because they were drugged, which then goes into why men drug their victims, or why pedophiles choose children under the age of 3, because they have a higher rate of not remembering to be able to enforce the laws. And this is a huge problem that men can only really fix. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there is this disparity and justice, the protection of power. I mean, look, we knowingly 30 something percent, 33% or 34% of the American population knowingly voted for, and that includes women and men. I think 40% of women voted for a convicted rapist,
Right.
right? A
Absolutely.
rapist with credible allegations stemming back 20, 30 years of sexual inappropriate behavior with children to the highest office. And we did that knowing this information and did not care. So the protection of power, the cultural messaging that basically normalizes this, and around, for instance, whose safety matters,
Right.
right? So when
Right.
people seek a lack of accountability, whether in everyday situations, right, or at the highest levels, like I just mentioned,
Mhm.
what does that teach society about whose safety matters and whose doesn't?
Right. Well, one of the things that came up as you were speaking, is that, the founding fathers were traffickers. Were, at involved and leading a system of human trafficking and chattel enslavement, which included systemic rape, which did not avoid the rape of white women also. That was happening too. But the deepest part of that was the torture and harm that was coming to African and Black women during that situation. And again, we often, push that to the side, and we don't want to think about that as trafficking. We don't want to think about, we don't want to place, Christianity and its privilege that it has in a place that was defined by the doctrine of discovery, defined by the papal bulls that dehumanized whole swaths of humanity across the globe,
Right. Can we
so
just even
that
talk about the Magdalene laundries that
right.
didn't end until
Absolutely.
1994, that legally
Absolutely.
trafficked babies under the guise of adoption in Ireland? Like,
Absolutely.
that
Right.
practice started in the 1600s and didn't end until 1994. Like, right?
Right. And, that makes me think of the, so-called residential schools or concentration camps that the indigenous people on, Turtle Island, North America have been talking about and trying to get people to understand. And also, that our great hero, Criminal Columbus, instituted rape as a weapon of war, and this is the guy people still want to have a, national holiday about. So, this cult of patriarchy has and empowering men and others who support those systems has been around since the country has been around, and before, at least 500 years or more. And yeah, let's talk about the burning times in Europe, and what the Inquisition and was all about, and even the German book, the Malleus Maleficarum, that that codified torture, at the time, that the Roman Catholic Church adopted as its text, for how to bring people into line, and how to, in an imperialistic fashion, spread this kind of cancerous, wetico disease, around the globe. So that we have that now should not be surprising in a way. It's horrendous that it happened. That we have this history, this recent history of this man, being put into this powerful place, but is not new that that happens. And that's
Right.
one of the steps I think that's so important around getting men on board in particular. Women have been on board. Y'all had to be on
We're
board,
tired.
or else,
We're
yeah,
exhausted.
and your lives has been at stake, and your livelihoods at the very least have been at stake, but your actual lives have been at stake for thousands of years. Let's just say that, through patriarchy in different parts of the world. But and very generally now, that a lot of these dynamics are really globalized, you know
Yeah.
um and so just
It is
knowing that this
fascinating to see
happens.
how it's all hitting globally right now,
Yeah, yeah.
all these factions, right?
Hmm.
And the resistance, even within the so called good men, right? The fear, the conditioning, and the social consequences, too. I will say, with all of this, I have seen a lot of men tackle these issues. But I'm finding it also interesting. The ones that are tackling the issues of violence against women are those that were sons witnessing their mothers
Hmm.
either be murdered or abused by their fathers. They're the men that I've seen rise to the occasion. But I haven't really seen a lot of other men address it. Or if they have, they're silencing those men or they're bullying those men, right? So, in your work with men, so I'm curious on this. What do you feel are some of the biggest barriers that stop men from stepping into accountability, and what actually helps them move through that?
Well, the one thing that I always try to bring up whenever I talk about these things is power. One of the things that's happening is that men know, um, consciously and unconsciously, that we have a place of power within the society, and so many of us don't want that challenged. We just don't want that challenge. We have a level of control, and that's not applied, evenly or monolithically, amongst men everywhere. And yes, particularly Black men. I think we have a what I call a provisional or conditional level of patriarchy, which gets destroyed within racism, but our negative connection to that is very real in our own communities and beyond, and we have to own up to that. But we also have to understand the generalized power that men accept as part of their masculinity and manhood, in the world, and that's one of the reasons we don't challenge it. I have to say that first, because some of the other things are like, well, we're not sure, we don't know. We're caught in the shame and blame cycle and things like that. Oh, you're blaming all men when I didn't do anything. I didn't kill a woman. I didn't sexually assault them. That kind of thing. But it's like, well, you are part of a system that does, that says that that's
Or
okay.
and don't sit there and tell me, because the stats are there, right?
Yeah,
That you didn't
exactly.
hear some crude joke about somebody's spouse
Right,
or somebody's sister or somebody's mother or
right.
some girl walking down the street,
Mhm.
and you know, um, or that you crossed a boundary with a woman,
Yeah, yeah.
and maybe you're older now and you regret that because you see now, like, these are things that you can talk about. I've seen some men talk about it with some backlash, but I
Mhm.
think there needs to be some grace if you have harmed and you recognize and you're learning because of the conditioning of what you were taught. That's different, and that needs to be shared.
Yeah, exactly. And men need to create those spaces. One of the things that I've seen in over, and I'll just say generally about 10 years of looking at it much more closely, when I actually defined, what I call men's work, and have started naming it and hashtagging it and things like that. What I've noticed is that when women talk about their experience of harm, men jump in and always say, well, what about men? Sometimes women harm, even though, and that's true. I've had that happen to me. And though it's more likely a man that's going to harm a man than a woman.
It's like 95%.
Yeah, exactly.
Like 95% of
Hmm.
the homicides of women are by men.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Absolutely.
one in
Yeah,
three women, it's just the numbers are higher. It doesn't mean a woman doesn't
absolutely.
do it.
Right.
It's just that a man doesn't walk out the door and wonder if a man, if a woman, I mean, the man doesn't walk out the door and wonder if a woman's going to accost her, make
Right.
some sort of sex calls, wonder
Yeah,
if she's
absolutely.
going to be, if she has to have eyes behind the back of her head, does she have her mace or her blowhorn or whatever
Right.
because some dude is following her, right?
Right.
So like that, a man doesn't have to deal with that every day, or a man doesn't have to worry about losing his job because you tell your boss to keep your hands off of you, and so and that needs to be separate. So the minute
Right.
you that happened to me, my first
Yeah.
job out of college, I was fired because I just went to my manager and said, can you tell so and so in this department to keep his hands off of me, because he
Right.
would literally grab me every day and like tell me all his sexual fantasies. The guy
Oh my
had three
goodness.
small
Yeah.
children under the age of 7,
Yeah.
and like, and I just said, can you please just tell him to keep his hands off? Like, I just want to be able to do my work. And I just left at that, figured that that was it. I came in the next day, I was fired.
Right. And that
Like,
happens so
men don't
often.
have to experience that.
Right. Not for those reasons. Yeah. Definitely not for those
Not at
reasons.
the same level.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh,
it's
clearly not.
different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you say yeah, but I
Mhm.
love these like yeah, buts, right?
Yeah.
The yeah,
Right.
but or
Mhm.
men too. Like
Yeah.
I want to go, the body bags don't add up.
Right.
Okay. The body
Exactly.
bags don't add up. Okay. So
Mhm.
before we
Well,
go
I,
down those rabbit holes, I'm just curious
yeah.
here because I really want to focus on action steps too,
Mhm.
because we can go into all the things, right?
Yeah. And
And for
if I
that,
may jump in just for a second, I just wanted to finish my thought about men, because men have pushed back and said what about ism and but men get harmed.
right.
What the thought I just wanted to finish was that the challenge for men is to create our spaces for ourselves for our own healing, to create spaces for ourselves to face these dynamics, to face these realities of what we've been involved in, what we've been complicit with other men, so that we can do that down and dirty work together, so that we can get beyond it, so that we can heal ourselves from our complicity within a system of harm, for women and others, and that includes other men, so that we can get beyond that and heal and actually step into fully a system of a process of liberation, equally with those around us, with women and queer folk, and other men who are marginalized by patriarchy also, which we all take a hit with it, but we're still in
Yeah,
power. That's the thing. So yes, when we use our power to create those spaces of healing, that's where the rubber hits the road, and we have to be
absolutely.
conscious of what we have done collectively as men, globally as men, locally as men, and even in our families as men.
Because this
And
is
we
how we
need to
teach the
find
younger
places.
generation, right?
Absolutely. And they have to see us doing that. Our
Yes, they have to
sons
model it.
should see dad and uncles having a conversation in another room and say, yeah, they're cleaning up their crap.
Yeah,
That has to happen. They have to say, we have to be able to tell our son, hey, son, I'm going to my men's group meeting. I'm going to my anti-patriarchy meeting, and we'll see you later. Love you. Do your homework, and we'll see you in a little bit. That
right.
needs to be normalized.
And
Yeah.
it also doesn't negate that there are clearly, based off I go by voting election, there are 40% of women that have to also unpack their inner misogyny and their
Right.
inner patriarchy too. So
Right.
those women also have to look at themselves and how they're supporting these systems that are harming their own, like we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're harming our future generations, 7 to 10. Any action we do today last 7 to 10 generations to come. We're impacting those generations to come.
Yeah.
And it brings me to a thought before we go into the next segment
Yeah, please.
is I had this one client that changed me several years ago, that passed away from dementia.
Mm.
And he taught me a lot around the issues of men's work. And I think he was really ahead of his time. He was in his 80s. And back in the 70s, he just started getting together where one person was having marital troubles or something like that. And they would just meet over coffee and just chat and support each other. It wasn't like a
Simple.
bitch session, it was a support, right?
Simple. Yeah.
So over like I think the years, like when I went to the funeral, to make a long story short, like there were 10, 15 men that for 30, 40 years who had been consistently showing up. And the things that they said about the importance of this men's group that they formed was life changing.
Yes.
And it is not seen in today, and how needed it is that men need their own groups to allow themselves to feel, that hugging is not feminine, right? Like all these things that men are conditioned to think, you're going to cry, you're a sissy, right? Like I remember growing
Right.
up hearing that too, right?
Yep.
Like those are all not normal, right? The reason why men are bottled up with anger and rage is because they don't know how to tap into the other emotions, right? So what I would like to tap into for those who are listening, we're not ending the conversation with just awareness, because we want to really move
Right.
into
Right.
actionable steps.
Right.
We're going to talk about actionable steps first with men. So if men that are listening, there's some tangible ways to interrupt that rape culture starting today. We're going to go over that. And then we're also going to go over, like, if you are a parent or if you are a woman, and what actionable steps can you take today to help make these changes? Like, these are things you can start today, not tomorrow, right? And then I'm going to take us through that process. We're going to take through that process of how to discern which actionable step is right for you based on where you are in your life, in your journey and circumstances, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's engage that right now with men, So what are some steps that you see? I know, like, the other day we were talking that you posted something on social media, and there was a man that commented, for instance, like, I don't know what, nothing's working or whatever. And, it doesn't matter what we do, or, that
Mhm.
type of mentality. And I think I just said, here are actions you can do. And I just gave 7.
Yep. Yep. I appreciated that.
And I
Yeah.
went boom, 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 boom. And I think the response to that was pretty good. And not just there, but I shared that at a deeper level on other platforms. So
Yeah. I noticed.
let's just talk about that, because I think that is what I'm not seeing on other platforms. I'm seeing a lot of men's behavior and how we should and what we shouldn't do and what we should do and how we need to be. And I'm not seeing actionable steps that men can do today.
Yeah.
And I think that's important,
Hmm.
right? Because men need a direction on options of what they can do to show up better.
Hmm.
And understand, men that are listening, again, I'm going to reemphasize, any actions you take or do not take today impact generations, 7 to 10 generations after you. So
Absolutely.
that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And we need to be about breaking those cycles of silence, those cycles of harm, those cycles of acceptance. And, one of the things that, I suggest to men is, first of all, is, can you just click like on when women speak about their experiences, can you just, first of all, just click like on it, click love on it, click that, compassion button. Just let people know that you've heard them, and also advance that. We all know what clicking things does. It brings attention to a thing. Just do that. That's number one. It's the easiest thing you could ever do. The other thing you can do is say, I've heard you, and say, yeah,
Or I'm
and ask
listening, I'm
questions.
learning. I'm
Yeah,
here, I'm
yeah.
listening, and I'm learning.
And not necessarily to put more emotional and intellectual labor on women and queer folk, but yes, to ask questions if it's appropriate to do that, but also just to go study, figure out what's happening. There's any number of resources where we can find out what is the lived experience of women under patriarchy, and also what's the lived experience of men under patriarchy. And also, that means we can, yes, definitely create groups where men can share this information and do this work. We can also do political work. There's a group of men. I think they might be Veterans for Peace in Boston on Park Street Station. And I remember talking to them. And they said, we're always out here every weekend. This group of men with signs saying, no to war and things like that, which is a patriarchal emanation. Global war is patriarchal. We don't know any women, sending Scud missiles or whatever they got now, across continents and ICBMs and drones. No, that's not happening. Yeah, women are in the military, but these are controlled by men.
Right, men. Let's
So
just be clear, right?
Yeah.
Men are responsible for the majority of wars, genocides, mass shootings, domestic violence, violence on women, violence on children,
Mhm.
patriarchal, um, religious harm as well. So,
Absolutely.
like men, like 90 to 95% are
Yep.
responsible for all of that
Yes.
because we're living in that patriarchal society and we have stripped out like the one thing that is good with this whole thing that came out the other day, regarding motherless is that it's a highlighting that we are a motherless society. We
Hmm.
have abused and raped the mother to such an extreme. Even our Mother Earth is fighting back. And
Right.
we are facing potential extinction level crisis in the
Hmm.
coming decades.
Hmm.
And, until men kind of cop on and women that are endorsing and supporting this, we
Hmm.
need to unpack that. So that's, I guess, for me, I want to say, let's unpack this. Let's unpack, where we're hiding our inner misogyny, our inner patriarchy, our inner harms, without shaming ourselves and just saying, okay, I was conditioned. Holy wow, now I'm awake. Now I see. So how do I take the next step to learn how to unpack this in a way while also monitoring when I get triggered because I'm getting defensive, maybe because of something I did in a past harm I did to a woman or a child. But maybe at the time I didn't think it was harm because at the time I was conditioned that that was how men should behave, right? Or maybe I didn't address something in the locker room, right? Because, you know,
All
it
the
was
guys were saying
normalized.
it, and they all laughed. And if I go against that,
Then I'm ousted out of the whatever the boys
out
club,
out of the
right?
in group. Yeah. Hmm.
Right. So, but I want to go even beyond just that. I want
Hmm.
to say, like, engage in policy. You don't just have to have opinions. And even if you're just learning and I always say we're going to make mistakes when we're in the learning and unpacking process. Okay. So you also have to have a sense of awareness to know when you start responding in a reactionary way and be able to pause and pull yourself back and
Hmm.
recognize that that may be not a time to respond if you're in that triggered state, that but you can do certain other things like engage in policy. Almost every state, I'm sure, has some form of domestic violence law, legislative bill pending. In Massachusetts, for instance, we have the litigation abuse bill. So it's genderless. But if you help support the litigation abuse bill, then we're stopping the perpetuation of bankrupting families and allowing the family courts using the family courts to continue patterns of abuse. As a result of litigation abuse, domestic violence related suicides are also skyrocketing because victims, when they engage in they're stuck in family courts, they're literally feeling like they have a noose around their neck and as if they are basically enslaved in a system that they can never break free from. So the suicide rates are skyrocketing. So
Right.
you can be part of that by saying, you know what, I'm going to call my legislator and say, please support this bill, right? Or donate, right? So engaging in policies and engaging when there are teachings in how can you do better. And I will say this, if you're a man that enjoys controlling women, that enjoys subduing women from a
Yeah.
power and control place, you're
Abusive.
going to be outed because we're beyond that state. The level of awareness is there. So if you're even coming on this platform to see what you can siphon so you can weaponize what we're doing, it's not going to work anymore.
Right.
I'm just
Right.
going to say it's not going to work anymore.
Hmm.
Okay, because we're at that turning tide. This is something that is like beyond that tipping point. So you can contact your legislators between pending laws. You can call your congresswoman. Here's a big one. You
Hmm.
can call your congressperson and demand that the ERA gets published.
Right.
The ERA has already been ratified, which gives, if you don't know what that is, that's the Equal Rights Amendment. So
Hmm.
you can contact your Congress if you do nothing else. Like you can call your congressperson every day and
Right.
say, why isn't this published? My mother, my sister, my daughter deserve to have equal rights under the Constitution than that man. Because SCOTUS, when they overturned Roe, they deemed that woman was not a person. Therefore, women are not protected under the Constitution. The
Right.
ERA is critical. The
Right.
ERA has kind of gotten quiet, and I don't know what the status of that is, but that is something that we can do. These are actionable steps. Men, if you're looking, this is like, where do they stand? What actions are your congressperson or your legislator doing?
Right.
Equal protection under the law should not be debatable. And
Right.
so the engagement around legislation and policy for women having equal rights is important. We're not going around regulating men's prostate, testicles, and
No,
penis.
not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
Hmm.
We have more funding going towards Viagra than
Right.
we do about women's trauma and reproduction
And
issues,
reproductive health. Yeah. Yeah.
reproductive health.
Absolutely. Mhm.
So, like, these are things that shouldn't be debatable that you can do today. Like, that's just one, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I always, would suggest that when men see women stepping out of their homes to, raise their placards, raise their voices, raise their thoughts and intellectual labor around things like that, around legislation and around other cultural and social issues like protecting Planned Parenthood or other resources that are helpful to women, and others and everyone, actually. I've utilized services of Planned Parenthood myself. But that men go with them, but that men go with them in a principled way, not dragging their feet, not saying, when are we leaving? Can we get coffee? But standing beside the women in their lives, standing
Truly holding
beside.
space.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we get all chest puffery about, oh, we're the protectors and providers. Well, go and protect. Be quiet and let them speak, and be in a space where they know they've got your, you've got their back,
Can we just
at least
reemphasize that
that.
again? Can we just say that again?
Hmm.
Like, to guard and protect, right? And to, like, that is not sitting there going, well, it's time to go. I've got this and I got that. I
Yeah,
got to be with the
right.
boys. I don't
Yeah,
have time for this, right?
yeah.
It is doing what you just said. I want to really emphasize that.
Yeah. It's like, go with them, and again, ask questions of the people you say you love. And many times, men are not loving fully because we're not willing to be there fully. Let's just say that, which points to, men having to do a lot of inner work and a lot of external work around these issues, and once we again realize that we've been dehumanizing women forever, and we often dehumanize our partners. We sideline their needs, we sideline their ways of communication and what they need from us. So yes, we need to have their back. We need to be behind them and beside them. We don't need to lead women anywhere. We're not just natural leaders. Many people say that men are naturally submissive because one of the things we do is we listen to other men all the time. It's like, they say, oh, go bomb people of color in another place, in another country. We're like, yep, we'll go, that kind of thing. So, we have a lot to learn, but we have a lot to support. Women are already blazing those trails, and we just need to step onto those trails. We just need to
Yeah.
step on. And then we can build our vocabulary of advocacy for women, which will include our language and vocabulary of challenging other men and our violence against women that have propped up these systems that women are saying, no more, it's not happening, we've had enough. And like you said at the outset, Laura, you and
Yeah.
I have been having these conversations for way too long. Both of us know that this doesn't happen overnight. The change doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. I
But
think, I
but
think, yeah, I
yeah.
think I would like to just add like resources for folks to start to learn about these things, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
in Massachusetts, we have Jane Doe Inc.
Yeah.
that addresses and also addresses how men can support. And they have training and they have workshops and they have all these things that you can attend. We have
Well, the Boston
also,
Area Rape Crisis Center
yep. And we
specifically
also
for women.
have, I'm also thinking of domestic shelters, which is national, which has a lot of data and stats and on learning about the impact of women and children, and as well because there's stats on men there too. So it's
Yeah.
so it gives you the full educational thing. Then we
Mhm.
also have the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So like those to me would be great organizations to learn, to unpack, to really get educated from an education standpoint. Like we also have to like education is not the Andrew Tates of the world. Like we have to, or Donald Trumps of the world. Like
That's miseducation. Yeah.
it's influencers are not educators.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay, they do
Generally
not
not.
have the data and stats and the numbers and all these things. So another way, leading into this, another action step that you can take is put resources where crisis is. For instance, in Massachusetts, Maura Healey cut 10% of domestic violence funding and sexual assault funding, yet domestic violence related homicides are up 40%, and the need for services has skyrocketed. So the services were already underfunded to begin with. So donate to your local shelters
Right.
financially. So
Right.
even if you don't know what to say or what action to take, money in grassroots places matters. These
Mhm.
organizations are underfunded, over capacity, and many times serving life and death needs. And you can also look into the National Domestic Violence Hotline to
Right.
help as well. That's important. So if you have the means, this is not charity, it is intervention that can save somebody's life. A
Right.
woman dies every day because of a man
Right.
in their home
Absolutely.
who takes and turns love into abuse and violence and control, and then takes her out and deems her less than in the
Yeah.
end. Many times it includes the children. And I guess another thing would be another action, right? Would be how do we demand accountability from our leadership?
Hmm.
Let's address that because we saw this happen in the last election cycle, right?
Hmm.
On the gaps between accountability in sexual assault and pedophile and rape and domestic violence claims and abuse cases, and we elect these people into positions of power.
Right. And that's another place we've seen men be, horribly silent. We didn't speak up, and it's not just about the Epstein files. There's much more going on than that, but that's another heinous outcome of all this stuff and of systemic patriarchy and child abuse. But we stayed quiet on that, and we have still been quiet on that, and we've also stayed inactive about it. Nobody stepped up to the Capitol steps, and said nobody leaves until we do this. Again,
You're not seeing men doing that, right? You're not
we
seeing
are
them like
not
doing sit-ins.
seeing men do that. We are not necessarily organizing politically around these issues, so I think that's important that we notice that and that we seek to change that, and I also wanted to, if I may, just add, the Love Life Now Foundation, run by
Yes.
Laverne Gordon. I wanted to mention the network Lared, which has, a lot of resources for people who are experiencing, violence and, as we say, intimate partner violence. Also Rain, which I wish I could remember the words behind the acronym RAINN, which their website just put those letters in the search bar, and it's a powerful resource for people, with statistics and things like that. We talk about learning what's at stake here. Rain is a very good place for that. Also, organizations like Men Engage Alliance, Next Gen Men, a call to men with Tony Porter, the work of Jackson Katz. Almost anything that Jackson Katz, you know,
Yeah.
has
Well,
fall out of his brain is
I'll
really
also say
good.
like I'll also
You
say
know,
like what Tim Tebow is doing is really good too.
yeah, for sure, for
You
sure.
know,
Yeah,
he's doing some really good work addressing men's work, I think, and
exactly.
saying that we have a lot of work to do. We are the problem.
Right.
And I just want to give a shout out there too, because I have noticed that it's really important But I also think we have to demand accountability from our leadership,
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
we have to
It takes
demand,
voices
I
and
mean,
bodies to do that.
but it's not just the political sphere, because I've seen this, because of the work I do. I've also seen it where I've talked to firefighters, or I've talked to police officers and other people, and a woman will be harassed or assaulted on the job by another officer or superior. And the way I've seen it locally, like for instance, the town of Hingham, I think it happened with a police officer recently who reported sexual inappropriate behavior of a firefighter, and they gave her they called it a settlement, but basically it was a severance of her pay for the rest of the year. They gagged her from ever speaking about it, and they promoted him into a position of power. So, like, that's the accountability. We need to stop promoting these people to get the story to stop. The
Mm-hmm.
bullies are going to bully, and they're going to just bully harder if you promote them into power.
Right.
And so we have to stop promoting in corporations, in civic groups and organizations. I've seen it across the board, even in spiritual communities,
Mm-hmm.
where, like, oh well, we're diverse and inclusive, we can't have this person, and I stopped supporting and publicly ousted a major drumming circle community because they were knowingly allowing a domestic abuser to prey on women. And after the sixth victim, that was resulted, that reported domestic violence of this man that they met at these drumming circles, they finally did something, but six victims were left in their wake. And, like, this is the accountability. Like, yes, blocking, if it's a corporation or a group, organizations that are supporting rape culture is a big deal. We're seeing that actually is what is working in the Epstein files, where
Right.
people are boycotting products and corporations that are supporting rape culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Absolutely.
accountability. By putting your money where your mouth is, if you don't know how to speak about it or how to address it while you're learning, these are actionable steps. Okay.
Absolutely.
And also counting on and saying, what are we going to do? How do we get this? Because if we have one person that just says, how do we get this judge removed that raped a child, for instance,
Right.
then, that's not going to, people are going to throw in deaf ears. But if we have hundreds and thousands of, they're going to do something. This is the power of the numbers that
Yes.
work. Okay. And so we are here, we're at these things, but these are actions that nobody else can do. If you want to see the change, be the change by taking at least one of these steps. Start somewhere, right? And as we talked earlier before, right, that we need to start doing the inner work. Not only doing the inner work, but one of the things I think is helpful is men sharing that vulnerability of the mistakes that they have done and things that they are learning to do, to unpack, and the transparency that they are doing to hold themselves accountable, and to model the right behavior into unpacking. Like, that's important too, right? Can we talk that
Absolutely.
too?
Absolutely. And, in some of the one-to-one work I do, counseling with men, involves some of that vulnerability and what I call strength and vulnerability. And I've heard some men be very powerful in the sense that they're being really honest about their lives, about what they have done before. And some of the things have not been mistakes. They've been things that people have done, to get certain needs met, which include power, over their partners and in different situations. And so I'm hearing that in very personal ways, and it's very powerful for men to engage that. And we can also have, public conversations about this. We
Yeah.
can have public, conversations about accountability. And, those are things I want to be a part of also, and am available for. But we have to, yes, look at these systems of power. We have to disempower these men who do this, but also disempower the men that allow it to happen, and
Yeah.
who take steps to make sure that men are still holding power in this abusive and manipulative and oppressive way. We have to be honest about that. And part of that for me is, and I call it cracking our hearts open. We have to start to feel what women are saying. We have to start to feel what is going on for ourselves. And we have to
Yeah.
apply that in a principled and political way to our actions. Again, like we said, stepping out, doing the legislative work, supporting the legislative work. If you can't give money to an organization, tell people about that organization. It's what the internet is made for.
That's what
Click
social
and
media is
send.
meant for, right?
Yeah, just send the information, share things in their circles, and if men do more of that, sharing some of these resources, sharing what you're doing, sharing, say what Stacey Patton is talking about, Desiree Lawrence, Zerlina Maxwell, all these
Britt
voices
Fargus has
of
been
power.
doing a lot too.
Say again.
Britt Fargus has been doing a lot too.
Yes, yes. Bridge Feltis.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yep, yeah. No, we got it. Yeah, yes, they have been and are doing some great work. I have a very good friend who's doing some work with finishing up some work with Bridge Feltis, and so there are any number of resources of people that are available to help us along this path. But we have to do the things that we know already to do.
Yeah.
I find it a little disingenuous when men say, well, what can I do? I think that possibly comes from a good place, but it's like, well, again, it's not like we don't know
Yeah.
Google's there. And that's why I
Yeah.
always
But
say that it's important for us to have the language, because once we have the language, and we have the language by listening, because
yeah.
again, women, and the queer community have been saying this for a long time. They've been giving us the language. We haven't been listening, so we don't know. But that's on us. That's not on you.
Yeah. But
So
I think at least
the path is
there's
there.
I don't want to shut down men that are asking what can we do, because at least
No,
they're asking, And yeah, I know like folks like myself are frustrated because I want to be like, you should already know, and I get that, but I also don't want to shut down men that are
no,
asking, and it's okay to
no.
ask, and
It
but
is
also
okay
be
to ask.
ready, prepare
It
yourself,
is.
right?
It
Because I
is.
also want to say like growth that stays private, like if you're just doing the work on yourself and you're just kind of hibernating and you're in your own little cocoon, it doesn't shift a culture.
Right.
The rape culture got shifted worse and
Mm-hmm.
more in a very dangerous way, like what we're
Right.
seeing play out. It's because all these perpetrators felt comfortable
Absolutely.
to talk openly about what is wrong. And we didn't have enough people, enough good men and enough good women that didn't challenge these paradigms. It didn't say, okay, this is what I did. This is how I was conditioned. I didn't realize that what I did when I was 15, 16, 17-year-old boy was harmful because I thought this was what men did. And I learn now. And now what I'm trying to do is figure out, how do I make reparations?
Absolutely.
How do I talk about this so my son doesn't make the same mistake I did, and change the generations moving forward? That accountability modeled out loud is what shifts culture,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Exactly. Right.
Right?
And that's why, and I think it was a blog post that I wrote years ago that was called, Up from Digital Silence,
Mm,
because men weren't even showing up online to, again, click like or to share or to comment or anything like that.
yeah.
And we weren't asking the questions. And yes, we need to ask those questions, but we also need to listen to the answers, and we have to move our bodies and move our
Without the yeah, but.
voices without, yeah, exactly.
Without the yeah, but.
Accept it. Accept that story as a real story, because you accept women and queer folk as real humans, and that deserve to be listened to and supported, and to have solidarity with and advocacy for.
So that goes to me to like the other tip, which we kind of weaved in throughout, or action step that we have kind of already weaved in here, and that is interrupting the harm in real time,
Yeah.
right? Can you share what that looks like for you?
Well, one of the stories is the sexual assault of Chanel Miller by Brock Turner. The reason we know about that story in the way that we do is because two men stepped in to stop him in the spot of sexually assaulting her, um, in an outside, they were outside of a building. So two men stepped in to stop that. And Brock Turner only got 3 months out of a 6 month sentence, which should have been years, of course, because he was caught in the act. But the system of the injustice system said, oh well, we don't want to harm a young man, so let's let him go. But
It's
stepping
okay to
in
harm
and
the woman.
interrupting, yeah, right, right, harming a
It's
woman. Did
okay
I
to
say
harm
harm
the
a man?
woman where she has a
Well,
lifetime of trauma, right?
absolutely, absolutely. So, again, they're privileging men, but yeah, stepping in to actual acts of harm is very important, which may include, if you don't feel safe to actually step in physically, you can make a call. You can call in another man or another person. You can raise
The
you can
witness, be the
illuminate
witness.
that it's
Yeah.
happening. You can say it out loud. You can say, hey, what are you doing over there? You don't even have to go near them. But we can also report a thing. We can also videotape a thing. We can say, hey, I saw that something happened to you. I actually have a video of it. Do you need that in any report you're going to make, or something like that? We can do that. We can speak up in those situations of, a man saying something to a woman, that's negative or manipulative or harmful and disrespectful. We can say, hey, that's not okay. We can at least flinch. I learned that in my days of wanting to be a capitalist. When you're doing a negotiation, someone gives you a price, you flinch. You say, oh, that's not right. It says that you're not into this. But we can also use our voices to say, hey, this is what you just did. You just brought harm to this woman, and I'm not going to allow it. I'm going to call it out. And you say you make a rape joke. Well, what's funny about that? And wait for the answer.
Yeah.
Watch them start to sweat and get nervous. We need to do that. We need to make patriarchy and misogynoir and misogyny uncomfortable for those who perpetrate it. And
And
just
that
like you're
also
saying.
includes the
Mhm.
objectification of little girls.
Absolutely,
You
absolutely.
know, the hyper sexualization of children, these
Absolutely.
pageants, which we saw with like the John Benet Ramsey and other things, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
the hypersexualization with makeup and jewelry and piercings
Toddlers and
and
tiaras.
things, and is really problematic, and we have to address that as well. Let
Mm-hmm.
children be children,
Right.
and stop trying to make them look like an adult so you can objectify them sexually. Refuse to normalize the as what you just said, like the jokes, the silencing of
Mhm.
what matters, addressing the harms.
Right.
And because culture changes when men stop performing for other men. Culture changes when men stop being silent around
Yeah,
other
and
men's
complicit.
harms and complicit. That's the word I was
Yeah,
looking for, complicit.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, I mean, like, we call that bystander abuse. Bystander, like an abuser only has, I've been saying this for 20 years, abuser only has as much power as the bystander is willing to let them have.
Hmm. Yeah. One of the most powerful lines in the movie Spotlight, which was an amazing film that people, if they haven't watched it, should watch it, about the Roman Catholic priest sexual abuse case and cases in Boston and New England. One of the strongest lines was, "If it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one." And it really talks about the grooming of a culture of the village, of the neighborhood, of the people, that allows for these things to happen and right in front of our faces. We know things are
Yeah.
going on, but if that group of people, and I think men have to be a part of this group of people, who stand up and say, we cannot allow this anymore, because not only are these our family members, we get all bent out of shape when we talk about, yes, we're going to protect our sisters and daughters and everything like that, but we have to see every woman as a valid source for advocacy. Every
Yeah.
single woman and every single queer person is valuable to protect and to allow their voice to come out and allow for them to have agency and power in their lives, and to be
Mhm.
liberated from these systems. So yeah, what the group of people around victims and survivors do is really, really important, and that's why our voices are important, and we need to hear more men's voices in this. um
Yeah, and I guess that goes to my next point. Another action step is when somebody discloses abuse, violence, sexual assault, any of those things, whether as a child, as a woman, doesn't even matter what gender you are. And I think this crosses all barriers here.
it absolutely does.
And I would say, believe survivors. I am so tired of seeing a woman go on TV, honestly, disclose abuse, knowing the retaliations, the death threats, the other things that have to uproot their families, their jobs, everything. And there was a very well known Tina Swithin of One Mom's Battle just had to take a step back because of her advocacy that she's been doing for almost 20 years, because of exactly what I just said. And, you know, and her addressing some really high profile cases. And we have to believe survivors. We have to offer like a chain of strength around them to protect them. We have to offer resources, not opinions, help connect them to legal support, safe housing, advocacy groups. Because when we start saying, oh, she's lying, she's just trying to profit, she just wants to make a name for herself, she wants to write a book or make a movie off of this, she just wants to destroy his career. The data does not support that.
Right,
The
absolutely does not.
data does not support that.
Right.
So support isn't just saving, it is standing beside somebody while they reclaim their power. And that's,
Absolutely.
I mean, we saw that with Amber Heard. The level of stalking and like the I think it was 1 million bots were paid for by Johnny Depp starting 2 years before the trial, judge shopping. And what was disturbing is seeing how many women were cosplaying and victim shaming. And I just can't. I can't, like, we have to stop that behavior. We're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Stop victim blaming and shaming and stop. We have to actively support survivors,
Absolutely.
because there's a reason why less than 1% of pedophiles and rapists get convicted.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Less than 1%. There's a reason for that. And if we're doing cosplay of a victim because we are a fan of the other person, then we are part of the problem.
Right.
We
Exactly.
are part of the problem that is condoning violence on women and children. And that is, and stop. Like, that's where we draw the line, right?
Right.
So
Exactly.
another step I want to just see, another action step really is, how do we raise the next generation differently? So whether you are a parent, whether you are a football coach, whether you are a church leader, or in, the boys club, girls club, whatever, all these things, right? Boy Scouts, how do we raise the next generation differently?
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've always said is we have to be able to model what that looks like. Adults often say, and I say this because I, taught college, and, a lot of adults talk down to students and say, well, you've got to change the world. This is all, we're putting it in your hands now, as they wear that square hat with the tassel on it. But one of the things that we have to continue to do as adults is to model what that looks like. We have to be involved. We have to be doing that work. We have to be modeling that for younger people, as elders and older adults and adults, to those coming up, young people, boys, to teens, to young adults. And we have to be part of these movements. We have to be seen and heard voicing these ideas. We have to let them know that it's possible to have that come out of your mouth, to have support and advocacy come out of your mouth, and that, that's a normal thing, that's a required thing. Another thing is to bring up good resources for men and boys to learn, books that are more inclusive, or that are talking about women's stories, women's histories, queer stories, queer histories. We can also make sure that when we're consuming media, and media will invariably be racist and patriarchal at some point, like, don't go watch something about Mary, about a bunch of men tracking and stalking a woman and getting information about her to use against her so they could get access to her body without calling that out. you know
Yeah.
don't allow those stories to live without being challenged. And part of the research I've done over the years is that that can be very, very powerful, very profound for children when they have those stories interrupted, even if they're mediated stories.
Yeah.
And now with social media, we can ask those questions. Hey, son, daughter, or otherwise, or non-binary child, what are you seeing online? What did you just, what was that? Don't let it be a secret, because we know they're being targeted. We absolutely know they're
Right.
being targeted, not only for harm, but to accept rape culture as a norm. So we can ask them, we should ask them, hey, what was that? What did you think of that? We don't have to put value on it immediately, but we have to be able to have those conversations where you say, oh, really? So, they said this about women? Oh, her body, your choice? Really? What does that really mean to you? Ask those
Yeah.
questions and know enough to be able to put it in perspective for them, and let them know how you feel about that and why that is
Mm.
unacceptable to you. And that, yes, good men, good boys, good people, good humans do not accept those things, because that is
Right.
dehumanizing and it's harmful. And often we go back to, well, would you want your sister to be treated that way? But we should also be able to see, would you want anybody to be treated that way?
Well, I
It's
think
not
we
just
have to
about
stop.
family
I
and
think we have to.
bloodline.
I think we also have to stop the boys will be boys
Absolutely.
mentality, right? And it
We
brings
can
brings me
redefine that.
right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I think the
Mhm.
idea of boys will be boys is it's really saying it's okay that you fight. It's okay that you hit
Right.
that girl. It's okay that you touched her inappropriately. It's okay. It's
Right.
okay that you
Absolutely.
whatever.
Yeah. We have
Or
to
just
challenge
as
that.
whatever. But brings me to a story that happened in Hingham, Massachusetts that made national news,
Hmm.
and that was a boy in middle school took the picture of his female classmate and put it into AI and made her do things naked. And the questions that the school was faced with was saying it was sexual harassment. And I'm sitting there going, she was 15, she was young at the time, middle school. I go, that is child porn, that is child sexual abuse. I don't care if it's AI generated, and there needs to be accountability. And we need to, that's some of the language that we also have to reframe and
Yes.
understand and really teach that boy the seriousness of the consequences of what he did, because he
Right.
just didn't do it and just say, hey, look at what I created. He distributed to everybody throughout the whole school.
Right.
Okay. So it's teaching, monitoring digital consumption, monitoring how our children are speaking, especially our boys, and who they are influenced, knowing who they're influenced by. Because if boys, here's the thing, if boys are learning about masculinity from the likes of Andrew Tates of the world and on the internet, then we have
Mhm.
already abdicated responsibility. And we've
Right.
also abdicated and endorsed harm on women and other children. And in this
Mhm.
case, I saw that being perpetuated in ways that I don't think people realize the seriousness or the harm that was being done, because they labeled it as sexual harassment.
Mhm.
Again, the language matters. This child was distributing pictures of a naked girl, a
Absolutely.
minor child. I don't care if the child was minor or not that did it. I don't care if it was AI generated, because
Mhm.
this is some of the legal precedents that is going to
Mhm.
be addressed. It's going, I forget where it is in the courts, but this is a huge problem.
Mhm.
And the fact that we minimize that,
Yep.
and this girl had to, I heard stories of how other children had to leave the school district because
Mhm.
of stuff like this
Mhm.
and go to new schools and had to be uprooted into new schools is a
Right.
problem. And we
Absolutely.
have to sit here. And I remember, I think the first podcast we talked about was another thing about how adults were, in a way, not realizing how they were endorsing inappropriate behavior of teenage boys, pretending that
Right.
they were naked under car wash signs.
Right. I remember us
Like,
talking
hey,
about
look
that.
at me,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
adult women were like, oh, like, look at this. And I'm sitting there going, like, this is so problematic. And you don't know what you're
Absolutely.
teaching. What are we teaching
Absolutely.
these teenage boys who are already having hormone fluctuations?
Yeah. Hmm.
And then that they're being conditioned that women should be owned and controlled, because that is what is being put out there by
Absolutely.
these toxic men in these cultures, and our children are listening to this. And so
Right.
us as parents have to really take responsibility on what our children have access to and don't have access to.
Absolutely.
you
And that's why
know
we have to start asking questions. We have to actually have the conversation, just like, Black families have that conversation with Black boys and girls about what the world is going to be for them when they step outside that house. We have to have those serious conversations. What do you do when you get stopped by the police, or have police following you, or anything else? You're in a store and a white person says, hey, there's stealing something or whatever. We have to have those conversations with boys about, and obviously we already have them about girls, put the keys in your fingers, have your phone on, 9-1, and then just push the one, and stuff like that. But what do we tell boys? What do we tell
right.
boys? How do we tell them to be the safety instead of the danger around girls and women? How do we
so
not
t- right.
touch inappropriately or non-consensually, and that we should never do that consent is the core of good relationship, whether interpersonally or internationally. So
Right.
we have to be able to have those conversations and say it out loud, that this is the water we're swimming in, and this is the danger if we don't become involved in the process of learning about it and then acting like we know. It's one thing to hear it, it's another thing to then reorient your actions and your lifestyle to act as though you actually want safety for women and girls, safety for boys, and accountability and healing and real strength for men,
Right.
instead of
I mean,
oppressive power.
here's the reality, right?
Yeah.
I was sexually abducted at 12 by somebody in their probably 18 to 22. I don't know. It was a
Mm.
stranger.
Yeah.
I wasn't actually penetrated, so I wasn't, so I see that differently. But I was put behind a shed, asked to pull down my pants. I was fondled, I was touched.
Mm.
And it was the scariest thing. I never talked about it until I was in my 40s because of rape culture.
Yeah.
I was then another boy I used to play basketball with at the age of 13, who was 17, forced himself on me. Okay. Nothing happened there, but he also did the whole groping, touching, fondling, and I
Oh,
had
that's
to
enough
push
to
him
happen.
away. And I was 13 at the time. I was
Mhm.
then ultimately raped. By the way, this is all in one suburban town. So I'm saying this to parents who have teenage boys, okay, to please understand, all three times where I was assaulted weren't by old 50, 60-year-old men. They were all, when I was 13 was a teenager. When I was 12 was probably somebody out of high school. I don't know, just based on the appearance was, okay. And when I was 15, I was sexually assaulted by one of the first met boys I ever dated. At the age, he was 17. Okay, his name is, and I'm going to name him here, and I've named him elsewhere. Alan Baines was my rapist who stole my virginity. Okay, so the rapists aren't always who you think. They're not daddy. They are teenage boys that are committing rapes. They are college boys that are raping and committing sexual assaults. So it is important to teach your boys from the day they are born about, normalizing, their emotion without punishment or ridicule. Like
Absolutely.
teaching boys about language beyond just anger, like how to deal with disappointment, shame, rejection, when a girl rejects you, how to deal with sadness. There's
Mhm.
boys who can name their emotions are less likely to act out on them on others. And then when we make, like what you just said, right? Consent a daily practice, teaching them, asking permissions before touching. And it goes beyond that, just like a women, it's touching an animal,
Mm-hmm.
touching, wanting to do this or taking something from a shelf and asking for permission if it doesn't belong to you.
Mm-hmm.
Always asking consent from the simplest little things,
Right.
right?
Right.
Versus entitlement of I want, so I'm going to take.
Right.
That is rape culture language. And then we wonder why we get into the other issues that we're talking about. It
Right.
starts simple consent. Ask your friend if you can touch that toy. Ask your friend if you could ask them if it's okay to touch your dog,
Yeah.
right? Respecting no immediately and modeling that because your children, I learned this also too, your children are going to do what they see, not what you tell them. So
Absolutely.
this is where modeling what you said, right, was
Yeah.
important, right? Consent isn't just sex talk, it's a life skill. And that
Mm-hmm.
is something us as Americans have, like I see it in the work I do across the boards. When we do spiritual work and spiritual healing, like consent, even asking permission from your guides, asking permissions from your ancestors, asking permissions from the spirits of the land, the earth, the water,
Yeah, absolutely.
all these things. That's all consent. Because when we
Exactly.
start from place of permission, then
Mm-hmm.
we're allowed in. But if we're
Absolutely.
in from because I want this, and this is what, and I've seen this in spiritual culture, demand this from your spirit team because they're here to work for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's rape culture talk, right? Versus I'm here and I'm asking permission to be here. I'm asking for permission for you to show me. I'm inviting you in. That's consent.
Mm-hmm.
Can I do this? Can
Right.
I touch here? Can I, be your friend? Like, not just assume,
Right,
right?
exactly. And out of assumptions and again out of the desire to exert power comes harm. And again, that's why we need to listen to those experiences deeply enough and caring in a caring way enough so that we do not repeat those actions. And some of them are mistakes. They're definitely mistakes. Oh, I thought you wanted this, I thought you wanted this, I thought you wanted to do this. Well, we did this before, so I thought you'd want to do it now. No, we have to ask. Consent goes away. I mean, we have to check each time, is this all right? And I think you might know better than I, when was marital rape actually even made illegal? I think that was in the 90s,
It was
if
in the
I'm not
90s.
mistaken. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think if I'm not mistaken, it was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we had to look at like marriage in general was actually a form of ownership. What marriage, the concept of marriage with the church and stuff was contractual, where the women's family had to provide a dowry. It was a
Mhm.
form of, and men saw it as women were only there to reproduce and do domestic labor,
Mhm. Yeah,
you
and
know?
men sustain power through property titles and things like that through those transactions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
again, this is why the learning is so important, but also the listening is just so important. For men who want to do this work, for men who want to develop and be better, we have to learn to listen. We have to model that for our sons and children. We have to show them what listening means. We have to show them what mirroring back what we heard means. And
Mm,
we have to, model saying, oh, and then how can I support you in this? What do you
right.
need? What can I provide for you? And also coming to a place where we're able to say, hey, I need this because I'm in this state right now. I'm feeling angry and I don't want to take it out on other people. So I might need some space. I might need some support. Oh, I'm going to go get that from
Yeah.
my men's group because they're ready at a moment's
Yeah.
notice. you know
Right.
and
Right.
I hope that many people have that, but we know that men are claiming and having the experience of not having really close personal friends, but
Yeah.
that's partially because of patriarchy,
Right.
because that kind of intimacy, which I have with a number of men, in my life, and I'm lucky to have that, but we've worked on that as a group and in our personal lives to get that, which
Yeah.
includes things like accountability, to each other's lives and with our own lives and how we think and act.
So I guess that goes to also, I guess another tip for parents is don't outsource masculinity. I also want to say not just masculinity to the internet,
Mhm.
but also mothering to the internet. This is why they had that site Motherless, right? We have to teach boys the importance of matriarchy. We have to teach boys the importance of loving our mother. That also includes our earth that sustains
Absolutely.
us, right?
Absolutely.
So, naming the influences differently, stay aware of what your children are consuming. And most importantly, like what you just said, just to kind of reiterate, just talking about it, asking questions, challenging these ideas together with your children, especially
Mhm.
your teenagers.
Mhm.
Because if you're not in the conversation, somebody else is, and they're brainwashing your children with very toxic, harmful ideas and consumption, right? So, and as you also mentioned too, Ukumbwa, right, was interrupting that harmful language immediately, teaching your children. Don't, it doesn't have to be ridicule, it's teaching them, right, that this word, when you say this, do you realize what you're saying when you say that?
Right.
Right? Like
Exactly.
teaching the impact of harmful language and what that looks like. But then you have to be able to be in a place to know how to redirect them into better languaging if you're learning it yourself, right?
Mhm.
So not laughing things off when your kids might be saying something sexist about one of your female classmates, right?
Right.
Or the
Or about a
objectification
celebrity or
or
something like that.
celebrity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, celebrities are a big one, right?
Yeah.
Right? So the correction needs to be clear, calm, not like you're grounded, you're this, because you don't even know how to regulate what happened,
Hmm.
right? Because when you do that, you're just reaffirming what they're learning, right? So, but when you're clear and you're calm in that correction by saying that this is not okay, that's harmful. Where did you get this? Where did you learn this? Let's
Hmm.
unpack this together,
Right.
right? And understand why this is harmful. So
Yeah.
you're giving them now a teaching moment,
Right.
right?
And giving them a language so that they can be advocates in their lives, so that they can be the young person in middle school who steps out and says, hey guys, we can't be doing this.
Right.
We all have to have agency to do this. We all have to have the ability to lead, in this way, and also to be part of creating a culture of consent and a culture of, liberatory relationships.
No, yes, absolutely. And I'm just going to also reiterate, because I would like to move into the next section about what women need to do and tips on how to navigate the men in their lives. But I just want to add, like, it's important as parents to be models. Again, your children are going to do what they see. So if you're not modeling this, then that is going to require you to do some work on top of that so you can be in a position to teach them. And I know that things are stretched and people are overwhelmed across the boards, but this is the threshold we're in. This is a fire horse year. This is an action year. This is a get shit done year. And just remember that any action you do or do not do it will impact 7 to 10 generations down the line. And what I would like is, what tips would you offer women navigating the men in their lives who come up?
Well, there's so much that women do already that all I can say is continue being honest with the men in your lives. Set the boundaries that you need to set. And that's not always help safe to set boundaries with men, because that's exactly when men, come into states of harm. We know that it's most unsafe for women who want to leave a man who's been problematic and violent. When they're leaving is when a lot of harmful things happen. But that's why having circles of support for women is really important. And being strong in reaching out to other women and trusted men who they know will have their back when they are in need of help, but to utilize their own circles, which men are always belittling. Oh, you're going to hang out with the, oh, oh, it's the hands going out to cluck in the, that kind of thing. It's no, this is important for women to meet together, to strengthen each other, and to build relationships. It's sort of what women do. That's what women, how women have been guiding culture since the beginning of time. But yeah, I suggest that women, stand really powerful in their story. and don't, back off from your story. And yes, find the support that you need, and if you can find it in men, hold men accountable in your lives who say they're allies to be your allies, and
Yeah.
expect production from them, you know and um but most of it would be do what women are already doing. I'm not here to tell women what to do, and but yes, I can support the things that I've already seen, which are ultimately powerful about women, that their
Yeah.
voices are absolutely powerful and clear and concise, and that, I say yay and thank you, because that's part of what guides any man, or people socialize as men, to be good people, to be good men, is that we have listened to what's been going on, and that we're able to then move forward in that way. So you give us a great, great gift, just like when you drop those 7 action steps to that man who was actually being kind of problematic, as he asked about what can I do. I felt that, I see that all the time. It's couched in, this kind of energy, but I just so appreciated that you dropped it there. I was going to take a little bit more time to get there, but you just did it. And I appreciate it, but you did some work there. You did some emotional labor and intellectual labor. So, yes, to hear those voices of women is great. And also, women have been saying for a long time, we need men to, um, to back us up in all of this. We need men to
Yeah.
take some of this heat. So and so, as a man, I'm always gonna, go to that space to say that yes, men, we have to listen to what women have just already been doing. It's
Yeah.
all there. And so I have to say thank you to women, thank you to the, queer community, LGBTQ folks, trans men, trans women, for always holding up these higher levels of humanity for men that we should be following and stepping into, and doing all the academic work, all the activist work, all the spiritual work that you've been doing. And sometimes I've been, very honored to support some of those processes, but thank you for all of that. That has to be said. So yeah, for women to find their supports, please step out of isolation, which men like to put women in.
Yeah.
If I can support, that, I want to say that out loud. Please know that you're not alone. There's a family of women, across the globe that are seeking to find spaces for their voices, and all
Yeah.
of yours as women are included in that, as much as we can. And we know there's issues with class and race, that have to be figured out, but there
Yeah.
are
I
growing
appreciate
numbers
that.
of women who are speaking out. So please continue that process, and know that there are some men who will support you in that, but trust your guts. If anything, trust your guts. I've heard
Yeah.
nothing, a lot of stories about, well, I thought this guy was okay. I had a
Right.
feeling, I saw the red flag, but I didn't, I've done it too, but trust your guts. Your gut knows, your body knows, your bones know, and know that you stand in, a legacy of greatness with women.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I just want to kind of just summarize that a little bit for those. So for women, I want to say, like what you just said, like trust your intuition, trust your
Yes,
body signals. Like if something feels off, likely it is. And
it
I
is.
think a lot of times we've been taught to ignore that, to not trust it. And I've always said that's when we make the regrets, right? So discernment over is not an overreaction. This is hugely important. To learn to remember to set and hold boundaries early. If a man starts showing signs of love bombing, I want to marry you after 2 weeks of knowing you. If
Yeah.
setting those boundaries early is important, because if not, this is where coercive control and other dynamics start kicking in. If the
Absolutely.
boundaries aren't set early, watch for how boundaries are received, not just what they say. So it's actions speak louder than the words. If what they're saying doesn't match the actions, and I think that's where we get really, in a sense, confused,
Hmm.
like, or like I used to think that sex was love until I realized it wasn't. you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
So, like,
Right.
all these things we have to really relearn. Also, stop having the need to explain your need for basic respect and dignity and humanity. You are not responsible for teaching grown men on how to be empathetic or
Right.
trying to convince them to not harm somebody.
Right.
So the confusion is often a red flag, not a communication issue, right? So
Right.
again, right? And as you said earlier too, or like pay attention to peer groups, get into women's support groups that are actually actively doing this work. I am not a fan of women's circles or spiritual women's circles who are not addressing the real life issues of patriarchal white supremacist type culture
Right.
that needs to be unpacked. So
Right.
be very discerning on which circles you associate yourself with. Um, you know, in these groups, how do men in life behave? Does he challenge them or does he blend them in? Character shows up most early when it's tolerated. So this is how like abuse dynamics gets, into some challenges. Also,
Yeah.
resources and support of each other. One of the things I've learned is if you have common respect and for each other's bodily autonomy, mental autonomy, and physical autonomy, like love is about honoring those partnerships and safe contact. And not like, well, I've been with you so much, I'm entitled, or I paid
Yeah.
for this
Yeah. Yeah.
dinner, so I'm
Right.
entitled.
Right.
Like that stuff has to end, right? So
Absolutely.
community reduces the isolation and the risk. And I would like to just say too, women did not create rape culture, and
Mhm.
they are not responsible for fixing it. Although we have been shouldering probably 95% of the emotional labor, physical labor,
Absolutely.
financial labor,
Absolutely.
and spiritual labor. But we are powerful in what we model, what we tolerate, and what we teach the next generation. And that includes how we vote for politicians or for people that get promoted into positions of power at your job that have histories of domestic violence, sexual assault, or predatory behavior of children. Like
Yeah.
if you are going, yeah, but, and you do it anyway, then you are perpetuating the harm. Recognize it because we're witnessing it play out. Now
Yeah.
back to men.
Mm-hmm.
And for those men that are listening, none of what we have said today replaces your responsibility. It only reinforces basically how urgently you are so needed in to change the dynamics of what we are facing. If you're concerned about fascism and Christian nationalism, it is rooted in the very things that we are talking about today and how we view women. So, for men, it's action. For parents, it's reshaping. For women, it's discernment and boundaries. And it becomes a whole ecosystem of change, not just one group carrying it all.
Right.
Any final words you would like to share before I kind of go into, or just add real quick. In your discernment process, I teach this with my clients one-on-one. Whenever you're responding or you find yourself being reactive or triggered, my process is always stop, pause, breathe, continue to breathe, create that space so you can get clarity to know which action step to take. There's so many options we gave you, but really sit with what feels right for you that you have the capacity to do today while you're working on the other ones you would like to do tomorrow.
Right. Exactly.
There's my thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. And I,
Final word.
yeah, I always appreciate that. And yeah, one of my thoughts would always be, checking out men like Jackson Katz, who have always for years and decades that I've known about his work, said that this is a men's problem, that has been made problematic for women. Women have inherited the problems of men and the power and oppression of men. So men have to be a part of this dismantling of patriarchal systems, which includes, communication networks, which includes medical systems, which includes the injustice system, which includes education, which includes just social things like organizations and corporations like you're talking about, and even, ones that are set up for liberation or mutual aid have to be really assessed for how patriarchy and other intersectional oppressions live within them. So men have to take on this mantle of work, and that's why I call it men's work, and other men do too, but that's why I think it's important to define it as work, because that's what it is, and that's what it becomes when you see what we're up against and what we have to do, to bring the world back into balance.
It's very true. We're beyond the phase of stick our heads in the sand, numb our way through life.
Mm-hmm.
We want the change. We have to become the change that we want to see, not just talk about it, but actually walk it. And if somebody wants to either book some consulting with you or speaking or to work with you one-on-one or anything like that, what's the best way that folks can find you and find your work?
Well, I would hope that people would check out my link tree. Um, and if you can share that link tree link, that would be great. If you find me on Instagram or Facebook, and I believe also Substack too, you will find that link tree link that gives you, my bio, some of the things that I offer, testimonials, things like that, and some of the services that I provide for people, which is one-to-one counseling, also working with groups, organizations, and communities, to look at these issues, to really face this, to bring accountability around issues of anti-patriarchy and anti-racism and consent. I've been teaching consent for years now, and again, I look at it as a broad scale of things from the interpersonal to the international. So yes, reach me by looking at my information there. I want people to be able to see who I am and where I'm coming from, but also email is the best way to reach me, and that's my first name, ukumbwa@gmail.com, and that would be the best way to reach me, to book some time so we can talk about how we can work together, what that looks like, and how much time we want to commit to that, and what your goals are, for either organizational, group growth, or personal growth, and accountability. So yes, looking at my link tree is one of the best ways to find out what I offer and who I am, and then to email me would be the best way to contact me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, for those of you who lasted this long on this podcast episode, thank you so much for staying on this episode of Triggers in Spiritual Medicine. If you found this episode helpful and informative, we are a grassroots community, non-commercialized podcast. So your share, your like, your comment, all those things, your subscription really helps sustain our growth and our reach. It's very, very important. So, and until next time, for the next episode of Spiritual Triggers in Spiritual Medicine, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining.
Mm-hmm.